Good morning. The scripture reading this morning will be coming from Luke, the first chapter and the first 4 verses. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that ye may know the certainty of those things in which you were instructed.
We've got a new year and a new study to begin, and I hope you're excited as I am. We're gonna look at Luke the next little while, and one of the easiest books in the New Testament to translate in English from the Greek is the Gospel of Luke, and there's several reasons for that. It's arguable that the book of Acts that's tied with Luke might be the next easiest in line to translate from the Greek, and the reason is because Luke used very, very common words as opposed to Matthew, who had to refer to sometimes Jewish prophecy, or Mark, who was writing to the Gentiles and sometimes would use words that were a little archaic in the Greek, but Luke used the more common language of the common language, so it's easier sometimes to translate. So as we read the book of Luke, we can know for sure that out of all the gospel accounts, this may be the easiest one, the closest to the original language that it was written in. And so that's important for us. By the way, the scrap on the I guess it's your right over there. The scrap on your right is a part of papyrus number 45, they call it, which is a scrap of the oldest piece of papyrus that we have, with a picture, or actually that's a picture of it, that actually is part of what was written of Luke. That's some of the oldest that we have in the world. The other two there, one of them's the Greek alphabet, and the other there is what we call an interlinear. If you've got an interlinear Bible or access to an interlinear Bible on somewhere like Bible Gateway, you can actually look at the Greek word with the English translation underneath, and you realize as you look at it that some English words may take 2 or 3 words to translate one Greek word, or it may take one English word to translate 4 or 5 Greek words, just like if you're translating something from English to German or English to French or Spanish or something like that. For example, in German, we learned, "Wie geht es dir?" And in English, we say, "How are you doing?" Doesn't sound, and it doesn't translate exactly word for word, but that's the way it works. And the same way in the Greek here, as we look at that. And so we're going to see that. As we look at this, the letter's addressed, no doubt, to Theophilus. That's how it begins. Literally, Theophilus means lover of God. From the Greek theos, meaning God, and the Greek philos, meaning lover. Now, this is a brotherly love. We get our city name Philadelphia from the idea of brotherly love, the city of brotherly love, from this idea of philos. So this lover of God is like a brotherly lover. I'm on the next slide there, I think, but I'm not sure. Yeah, we're talking about who they were. Who is Theophilus? Who is Luke as we look at this? And Luke himself is apparently a Gentile. You know, when we read Colossians 4:11 through 14, Paul writes that there are only certain people of the circumcision who are with him at the time, so that would be Jewish Christians, and then he writes of others who are with him, including Luke. So Luke apparently is a Gentile. He's not a Jewish Christian, he's a Gentile Christian, which means, among other things, he wasn't there with Jesus during the 3.5 years of Jesus' ministry. Jesus was surrounded by Jews. The ones he sent out, when he sent out the 12, when he sent out the 70, when he sent them out, the ones that were around him at that time were Jews as well. So Luke was not one of those, and it gives us that very clearly as we look at that. He was a physician. He was a traveling companion of Paul, probably Paul's own personal physician, simply because he's the physician that was with him. And just like any other thing, if you've got the doctor traveling with you and something's wrong with you, you ask the doctor. You don't wait till you get somewhere else. You just go ahead and ask. I know Judd's been asked all kinds of questions about people's toes, even though he's an eye doctor. And I'm pretty sure that's happened to our other doctors as well. Our pharmacists have been asked all kinds of questions about, well, what happens when your stomach hurts? Well, they probably can give you answers for that as well. But apparently, unlike Matthew and unlike John, and to a lesser extent Mark, Luke wasn't an eyewitness to the events recorded in the gospel. Matthew saw it with his own eyes. He heard it with his own ears. Mark heard from Peter the things that Peter saw, and Mark was there for some of the things. There's great understanding among scholars that Mark was the young man who ran away naked in the night when Jesus was betrayed, that Mark was there and that they had stayed at John Mark's mother's house often when they were in the area there. And so we have no doubt that John was very close in the intimate circle of Jesus. And so the things he writes about, he knows firsthand. And Luke doesn't have that firsthand knowledge. And so he's got to figure it out, and we're going to look at that in the next little while, the next several weeks or longer. We're going to be looking in depth at the Gospel of Luke. If you figured it out already, 4 verses out of 24 chapters means we're not going to get very far week by week. But as we look at this and we understand this and look at this, we're going to see a good deal about the life of Christ from somebody who wasn't necessarily there for everything that happened, but who talked to the people who were to give us an eyewitness account. And that's going to be important for us as we understand this, as we look at it. So the first question we look at is, why did Luke write the book in the first place? Here's what Luke says about that. He says, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative, it seemed good to me also to write an orderly account that you might have certainty." Okay, now we know why he wrote it. John says, "I wrote these things that you might believe." Luke says, "I'm writing it so you can be certain. I'm giving you proof. I'm giving you evidence so that you as an impartial witness or as a partial witness, as someone who's trying to find the truth, can know for sure." Now, don't you want to know for sure about your faith? If my eternal soul hangs in the balance, I want to know for sure. I don't want somebody's opinion. I hate it when I ask somebody, "Well, what does this mean in Scripture?" And they say, "Well, I think it means." I don't care what you think. Tell me what it means. And that's what Luke is saying here. I'm going to give you the facts. I'm going to set it out in order for you so that you'll understand this. Evidently, the things that Luke was hearing about and seeing, and they were either incomplete or they were kind of jumbled up in order. And he wasn't getting a full picture as he listened to the different witnesses' narratives around to understand what was going on. And I don't believe when he says this that he's talking about Matthew or Mark or John and their Gospels. I don't believe John's was written at this time. But I don't think he's talking about Matthew and Mark and their Gospels. I think what he's talking about is all of this great cloud of witnesses. All of these people who were in Jerusalem during the time of Jesus, who are still alive at this time, so many of them. All of these people who were there on the day of Pentecost, more than 3,000 of them, who heard the message from Peter, who had some of them seen the crucifixion because it was only 50 days before and they were still in Jerusalem for the feasts that were happening there, who had participated sometimes. Maybe they had seen Jesus travel through their village and teach. Maybe they had experienced some of his miracles themselves or seen someone, known someone who had. And they all had a Jesus story. And they all had this knowledge. And just like anything else, their knowledge was vast, but it was incomplete. It's like a puzzle, missing a few pieces here and there. And you know, sometimes with a puzzle, you can make a piece fit where it's not supposed to fit. And that messes up your whole puzzle for a little while till you figure out how to get that piece out of there and put the right piece in the right place. And so Luke is looking at all of this. He's seeing it all around the world because these 3,000 went into the whole world and shared the message that they had heard. And he says it's not all complete. It's not all orderly. We need to put it down in a way that it makes sense so that we can understand what we're seeing there. And so that's what's going on here as he's looking at this. That's why he's writing the book, so that we can know for sure. Mark's writing to these Gentiles. And so the key word in Mark is immediately. Let me show you the power of God acting through Jesus. And so immediately, straight away, depending on what translation you're reading from, straight away these things happened. Matthew spends a lot of time talking about the Jewish prophecies and the way the Jewish prophecies were fulfilled, and that this proves that he is the Messiah that was promised in the Old Testament. John talks a whole lot about how much Jesus loved people, individual people, whether they were rich or poor, whether they were male or female, whether they were faithful or sinners, whether they were Jews or Gentiles. John talks a lot about those things. Luke says, we've got all these stories, we need to pull them together in an orderly way so that we can know for certain. That's important. That's important. That's why he starts his thing off there. I believe the Spirit was guiding him to write that because of all these different witnesses and all of their different accounts. And I think that's why there was, because they had gone through the whole world. And it was like the puzzle pieces there where you got a whole jumble of puzzles. Oh, you might put it together eventually by yourself. But my wife, when we're working jigsaw puzzles, my wife has to get the box. And she sets the box up there so she can see the picture on the box and know where the different colors go and the different pieces. I do it by shape. And so it doesn't matter. Sometimes I don't know what the picture's supposed to be. I've finished crossword or jigsaw puzzles before and said, cool, did you know that was a picture of balloons? And she's like, well, yeah, that's what's on the box. Well, I never thought to look at the box. Never thought about that. Yeah, okay, that's just the way it works. Luke has got all these puzzle pieces floating around through the whole world, the whole Roman world. And he says, hey, we need to put this together. He's been on missionary voyages with Paul for some 11 years or so. The better part of 11 years. He's seen what's happening in all these various towns and communities. He's heard what they've heard and seen what they've seen. He's heard Paul's sermons, and he wants to make sure that it's all written down so that we can understand it. Consider this. When Alan and I go to a football game, we like to sit up high. We like to sit up high so we can see the whole field and see everything that's going on so that we can know and watch what's going on. The Adamses and the Bowers, they sit down on one end. They sit down there because that way they can watch the players come in and out, and they're a little closer to the players, and they can have that closer relationship with the players down there where they're at. You know, at the same time, Coach Tipton and Coach McNabb are on the sidelines down there. I mean, they're right in the middle of what's going on and seeing what's going on, and the offensive coaches are concentrating on the line and what's going on the line, and the defensive coaches are concentrating on the defense, and Stewart's walking around taking pictures of everybody. You know, that's what he's doing. You know, at the same time, there's a couple that sits right in front of us that they pay very little attention to what happens on the field because they have two children in the band. They're listening for every note that they hear from the band. They're looking across the field at the band to see what the band is doing. That's why they're there, is to watch the band and to see what the band does. They're paying full attention to what's going on over there. There's another couple that sits down in front of us that they have a daughter that's a cheerleader. And all they really care about is what's happening in that 10 square feet on either side of their daughter, and they want to make sure no boys get in that 10 square feet. That's what they're concerned about. And so they're watching that. And Henry Turner, he's just there for the social aspects. And we sit together. And at the end of a play, any given play, you could ask any one of us, and we would have different perspectives. Judd might say, man, did you see how hard that kid got hit? Because that's his concern. Alan is going to say, why didn't the ref call the hold? I can see it from up here. Which the ref doesn't have that perspective because he's at field level. Coach McNabb looks out there and he says, man, that was a good block you put on somebody. Or that was a great tackle, a great hit you put on somebody. Somebody else looks at it and says, I can't believe that the band learned that new song. Didn't even see the play on the field. And Henry's glad to be there. You see, we all see different things. If you put all of what all of us saw together, you could bring the play back and see what actually happened. But sometimes somebody has to get up and go to the concession stand, and they come back. And when they come back, there's a different score than there was when they left. And so they ask, what happened? And here's what happens. I'll say, well, what you missed was, we threw a pass downfield. It was caught, and then there was a penalty, and then we had a run play, and we scored a touchdown. Well, I'm not going to talk about every single block that was thrown. I'm not going to talk about every single tackle that was made. You missed that. You're only going to get part of the story because I'm not going to tell the entire story because I'll miss the rest of the game explaining to you what happened in the few minutes you were gone. That's the way the gospel accounts had gotten out into the world. Different people from different viewpoints had experienced different things, seen different things, knew different things, and all of them were sharing this with everybody they met because they were so excited about this message that God so loved the world, he sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So they wanted to share that message with everybody. And they didn't have the full message. The Bible wasn't written yet. They couldn't say, hey, if you'll look over here in 1 John chapter 3, by the way, if you look over there in 1 John chapter 3, you'll be the only one that finds it. There is no such thing. But, yeah, there is. Just don't let me trick you. There is. There really is. But if you'll look over in 1 John chapter 3, it says that sin is a transgression of the law. And so that means that if we sin, we've transgressed the law of God. We need to know that. But they couldn't do that because they didn't have 1 John. And they didn't have Hebrews. And they didn't have Matthew and Mark. And Luke was writing it. And so he wanted to make sure they had everything that they needed so they would have it. So the question is, why would he write it? There's the why. So here's the next question. Got this from a lyric of a song. What to leave in and what to leave out. I love that idea. What to leave in and what to leave out. He says that the things that have been accomplished among us, those are the things he's going to write about. And his purpose is to fill in the blanks. He wants to draw out the narrative and fill in the blanks of where we don't have full knowledge and to give us a complete and orderly narrative that we can have today. Isn't it great that we can look and we can know for certain that somebody who was there firsthand interviewed the witnesses, talked to them, check this story against that story, check this person against that person, talk to this person who saw this and this person who saw that, and put it all together for us so that we could have it today complete and full, and he didn't have to leave anything out. It goes everywhere from the birth of the Christ child in Bethlehem, as prophesied, all the way through the teaching and healing ministry to the people. He talks about the death on the cross. And he talks about his resurrection from the grave. And only Luke, of all the gospel writers, only Luke, as he writes the book of Acts, talks about Jesus' ascension back into heaven. Only Luke gives us that account. So that we see this through Luke. That's pretty good stuff. So here's the next question. If he wasn't an eyewitness, where did he get his information? He says, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered to us. That's what he says in verse 2. He went to the ones who were the eyewitnesses to see what they had to say. He talked to them. He interviewed them. He asked them. He read their writings, the ones who had written down what they had seen. He compared the notes of this one and that one and the other one to make sure that everything he had was exactly right. He went to the sources. He didn't just take one coach's opinion. I have never seen a defensive line coach that didn't think his guys were getting held on every single play. But I've never seen a defensive coach who noticed that his guys were holding the receivers when they were running out on their routes. He noticed his guys getting held, but he didn't notice it the other way, and vice versa. He didn't just take one band parent's opinion about what it looked like that the referees were helping the other team. Looks like we're having to play against 11 plus 6. There's all them referees. They're all against us. He didn't just ask Dr. Adams and Dr. Bowers and say, hey, what do you think was happening on that play? And he didn't just go to Stewart for pictures. He didn't come to me and Alan and say, hey, what was your opinion about what was happening on the field? Since y'all had the view from up above, y'all could tell. No, rather, he talked to all of us. And he pieced together what was left. And he says all of this matches together so that he had a complete narrative. Can you imagine, just think for a minute, getting to interview Peter and talk to him about his time with Jesus, about the things Jesus said and did that Peter experienced firsthand, right up close and personal with Jesus. Can you imagine going to one of the other apostles, going to Matthew and talking to him, or going to John and saying, hey, tell me about your relationship with Jesus? Can you imagine maybe meeting a widow who had had her son brought back to life? Or maybe even meeting that son and talking to him about what it was like. Talking to her about what it was like to get her son back. Talking to people who had been in contact with Jesus, and in trying to piece all of this picture together for us. Wow. You know, I'll have to be honest here. I probably wouldn't have gotten much written down. I'd have been so caught up in the stories that I'd have just been standing there listening. I'd have been listening to Peter tell the story. I'd have been listening to somebody tell the story, and I would have got to write it down. I mean, it happens to me sometimes, and I know that's but Luke, guided by the Spirit, was able to piece it together and write it down for us. So what's so special about Luke's account that it's worth studying? Number one, accuracy. Accuracy. Luke says, having followed all things closely for some time past. In your King James Version, I think it says from the first or from the beginning in some other translations. He's followed everything very closely. He's watched it. He's looked at it. It's not something new to him. And then beyond that, from birth to death, from beginning of life and ministry to the end of life and ministry, to death, to ascension, he's been there the whole time. He's done the legwork and searched out the truth. And then order. He says to write an orderly account for you. Somebody asked me earlier, they said, hey, I'm looking at the red sheets, the little study guides that Stan puts out for us that you're looking at. If you're starting on that, she said, I'm going to have to get one of those study Bibles. That first question's a little bit, makes me think a little bit. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, which one of the gospel accounts was written in order? And I said, pay attention to the sermon, you'll get your answer. It's right there on the board. See it up there? It's there. It's right there so you can see it yourself. How wonderful that is. He wrote it down in order for us. I can tell you as a retired police officer that one of the most difficult things to do sometimes when you have a bevy of witnesses is to figure out which order something happens. Because what happens is people start telling you their story. They'll say, well, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Oh, yeah, and before that, this happened, and this happened over here, and this happened too, and you're not going to believe this and this, and you have to stop them and say, no, wait a minute, let's go back and try to get this in the right order. And you can't all talk at once. And so that's what Luke did. He sat down and he investigated for us so that we could see it and so we could understand. So our final question for the morning is, who is Theophilus really? You know, to quote the wise old owl from the old Tootsie Roll commercial, the world may never know. That's what he always said about how many licks it took to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop. Luke addresses him as most excellent Theophilus. That's the same title of rank that he used twice for Felix and once for Festus in Acts 22, 24, and 26. Again, many scholars believe he was somebody of high position and that possibly this treatise and Acts as well were both written as part of Paul's defense in his appeal before Caesar. That they're saying this is why Paul was teaching about Jesus, is because of these things about Jesus, and Acts tells of what he did and where he went as he did that. But again, we come back to the name Theophilus. Literally, lover of God. That's what it means, literally, lover of God. He might have been a Gentile believer, either with or without necessary social status. Or maybe it was written to all God lovers. Theophilus, lover of God. Alicia, do you love God? This is yes. Okay, all right, yeah. I could, she's like, don't call on me. Please don't call on me. But I did. Charlie Tudor, where you at? There you are back there. Do you love God? Yeah, okay. So there was an easy answer. You know, hey, we can do this all day. Dennis McCoy, do you love God? Gail? Who is Theophilus, the lover of God? Oh, she's saying, Mason, who is? You are. Who is Theophilus? Donica, who's Theophilus? There's somebody that loves God. Who is Theophilus? Alan, who is it? It's me. That's right. This letter was written to me. This letter was written to you. It was written to people who love God. Have you ever realized that God expressly had a letter written to you in the Bible? That's exactly who it's written to. It's written to somebody who loves God so that you can know for sure about your faith. How cool is that? How wonderful is that God cared that much for us? Luke says, I want you to know for sure. What was Theophilus supposed to get from it? That's it. I want you to know for sure. I want you to be convinced. It's similar to what Kyle Butt did for us last spring. Remember last spring, Kyle Butt came in and he talked to us about apologetics and he talked to us about some things. We already knew most of those things, but when he put them in a little different picture so it was easier for us to see, it's like, wow, I never thought of that. I knew it, but I just never thought of that. That's what Matthew Marine is going to do for us this spring when he comes. He's going to talk to us about evangelism, and he's going to put it in a way and in a light that's going to encourage us to go out and to actually be able to do something with it instead of just having this idea up here, to have a practical way of using that and applying it in our lives. We're going to be studying Luke for a little while. I would challenge you to read one chapter of Luke a day. There's only 24 chapters in the whole book. You can read the book of Luke every single month for a year if you'll read one chapter a day, and you can take a week off every month, just about, because some months have 7 days extra. Some months only have 6 extra days. February doesn't have that many extra days, but you can still get through it and take Sundays off or take Saturdays off or whatever and still do that. And you can read one chapter a day. And if you'll do that for a year, you will read through a book that God has written to you personally 12 times this year. Wow. How great would that be? God wrote me a letter, and I just keep reading it over and over and over again. How wonderful that's going to be. You want to grow closer to God and grow closer to Jesus this year? Then be a God lover. Be a God lover. Recognize who Theophilus really is. It's you and I. Why not read the account that he wrote to us? Perhaps this morning you're not a child of God. Maybe you've never put Jesus on in baptism. Maybe for whatever reason you've put it off, and it's time for you to make that commitment. It's a new year. We're in 2020. We're in a whole new decade. There are things going on right now in this auditorium that 100 years ago people wouldn't have dreamed possible. Nobody would have ever, most people didn't even have a telephone, let alone one in their pocket, let alone one that would work without wires. And 100 years from now, those big old bulky things that we hold in our pockets and that we pull out and look at are going to be so outdated we won't even imagine where it's going from there. We'll have our little earbuds that are wirelessly connected to our home phone. We'll leave our cell phone at the house. We won't even bring it out because we'll have connectivity from miles away or better. How amazing technology is going to be. But, this message hadn't changed. God wrote a letter to you. If you need to respond to God's letter to you this morning, we're going to give you that opportunity as we stand and sing to encourage you. Wash away my